So Dr. Strauss was born and educated in South Africa, and he immigrated with his family in 1995. And in his long career, he worked as a family physician for a period of 5 years, as a forensic psychiatrist in a maximum security prison for about that same amount of time. And he has spent the past 22 years working as a general psychiatrist in the community of Abbotsford. And from 1998 to 2014, he also worked at the Abbotsford Regional Hospital, the last 3 years of which he was head of the department. And so without any further ado, welcome Dr. Strauss. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you, Annette. And I have to say to all 74 others that's online at the moment, it's a great privilege and honor for me to do that. I said, you might have caught me at the chat just before we started, that I was nervous when we started because I'm quite used to talking to people when I can see them eye to eye. And it's a bit disconcerting to know that there are people there whose expression I cannot read, but I know that you're all good people, so I know that you have good feelings and vibes towards me, so I'll work on that assumption. And it is so right about this being a pertinent topic this particular year. The month of December in my practice always is the hardest month in terms of patients' needs, because I think probably because of us living in North America, with a very big impairment in daylight, but also because of the festivities of other people who are always seemingly happier and more joyous than we are. I found that people are having a very tough time this time of the year, to the extent that Annette also knows that people can become so isolated that they actually go through with committing suicide. And this particular year, I think, has been a monster of a year that has accentuated this even worse. So my hope is that if there's one of us that today realizes, oh my goodness me, I am suffering from burnout here, and I can do something about that, then all the time would be so well spent. So I thought what I'll do is to just let me just see if I can get this going. Oh, there we go. Yeah, I was just getting frightened here that my fast forward button doesn't work. That I thought that we'll look at those three factors at play to really have a very deleterious effect on our mental health. Which of the first is social isolation, more so this year than in the past 100 years. And so we have to simply remember that this fact that we don't have physical interaction with others is a massively antithetical thing to human behavior. We are not made to not be in contact, physical contact with others. As a famous Greek philosopher many thousands of years ago said, we are social animals. And it, I think, is worsened this year because it is enforced by us. If I decide to socially isolate in a monastery for 1 week and not speak and just contemplate, that is a completely different thing than when a government agency tells me you will socially isolate. There's an element of incarceration to that aspect. And yes, we're all doing it willingly, but it is very tough that it is to the extent that we have to stay away from each other because others can be dangerous to us and we can be dangerous to them, which really upsets our mental health apple cart. Because if I go into my local grocery store and 5 people smile at me, I feel like, hey, I'm in a small little village, even though I live in a city of 150,000 people. But if I go into the grocery store today and I observe how the people who have masks on are glaring with their eyes, only because that's the only part of their face that you can see, at those who do not wear masks, and those who do not wear masks look dismissively and contemptuously at those who are wearing masks. It just breaks my heart in terms of the trauma it is now to go to a grocery store. So this thing is extremely dangerous for us. And no wonder then that this is also the year where we, as predicted, and now see it, that relationships are deteriorating. So even if we are in isolation together as a family unit, that continued enforced proximity to each other leads to the inability to decompress and to recharge separate from each other as well, because we have this balance of being in a position where we want to be able to contact as many people as we like, but also to be able to go in our own little oasis at times. And studies specifically out of China is coming in fast and furious about how much domestic violence has increased. So this often may be something that we would know in our clients if we think to ask, but can even become something, say, with verbal aggression that we as caregivers can perceive or experience or be guilty of in our relationship. So it's a triple whammy that's hitting us in terms of social isolation. And what is the whole deal about that? Why is that a big deal? Because we are in a position where our lack of movement and sharing nourishment is taken away from us. Well, we understand the greater good of it, but these are fundamental vehicles of communication. If we think about a movie scene of bonhomie and happiness and joyousness and companionship, you see somebody sitting at a pub or at a restaurant or at a dinner table being together, consuming food together. We don't have that now. And there's a study in the Lancet that came out, I think, in November 2020, that showed that as few as 10 days of isolation already has psychiatric effects, and in fact has long-term effects. The probability of developing PTSD 3 years later is still much more increased after just 10 days of being isolated than persons who hadn't had that happening. So you can see on the screen, within 10 days of being isolated, we start getting more exhausted. We started detaching from others. Our anxiety grows up. Our irritability increases. We become sleepless. We start to have difficulties focusing and concentrating, as a result of which we start having poor work performance. I have many of my patients who were forced, not because they were not doing well enough, but because of the COVID restrictions, to work from home. And a lot of them are not willing now to go back to work, or is even thinking that they want to resign. And it saddens me, because it's not something that would have happened had the isolation not taken place. Isolation, enforced isolation this year, particularly very tough. We have to do it, but we have to be very mindful about the dangers that entails to us. Loneliness, which is a separate thing, but obviously a companion piece to isolation, is more about the fact that we need to have people. We need to have a friend. We need to have a comrade. We need to have a guy that we can let our hair down with. We need a spouse with whom we can feel safe or honest with. And the loneliness, again, is an issue which will leave us in a position where immediately, when we perceive ourselves as alone from others versus isolated from others. So remember the difference. Isolation, I can reach out. There are people who would be happy to see me, but I just can't physically do it because I'm restrained. Loneliness, I don't have somebody that I can reach out. But the two goes hand in hand. As we isolate, we don't see people as often as we would have, and therefore in that isolation, we perceive ourselves as more lonely. Even though we know logically they are also isolating, it feels to us if they're not reaching out to us anymore, so they're not our friends anymore. And that causes this a massive amount of stress. Our brain functions, again, in the same way that the isolation does. decrease our attention, concentration, and our memory, which leads to poor decision making. And there's studies longitudinally that shows there's a direct correlation between loneliness and eventually development of such neurodegenerative disorders such as Alzheimer's. So a very, very powerful negative effect on our physical and on our mental health. People who are lonely are much, much more prone to develop heart problems and stroke, much more prone to become depressed and have that cataclysmically end into suicide. And if we just think about that for a second, from that sufferer's point of view, that makes sense. They think that there's nobody out there that cares, who would even miss them. And then their thoughts becomes delusional. Hey, in fact, I'll actually do all the people who probably just sees me as a burden a favor to just check out. And all of us, hopefully, as we put ourselves in the position of such a person, our hearts break, because that is horrible, that loneliness would drive a person to that position. Completely not true. I'll be that person's friend. I'm sure that if I ask a raise of hands, who would be a lonely person's friend so that we can help them from not being depressed and suicidal? Oh, I'll have the 101 volunteers that's in the room right now. It's so terrible, and even more terrible so that some of us today sitting here may actually be suffering from that. What's interesting about it as well is that as you start entertaining yourself, having no other choice to do so, antisocial behavior starts happening, not asocial. It's important for us to remember the difference between those two words. And most people interchangeably use it incorrectly. Antisocial behavior, behavior where you do not concern yourself with the feelings of other people and then do selfish or criminal things. Asocial behavior, not reaching out to people because you have no need to be in social contact with them. But antisocial behavior can go up and substance abuse go up. Both those make sense, that if I am bored out of my gourd, and I see something interesting happening, even though it's not very ethical, I might be tempted to do that thing because at least it's not boring. And substance abuse becomes treatment for that boredom and the pain of feeling that nobody else actually cares about me. So if you look at this list, I could actually add many others, but I don't want to bore you with lists. One of the other things that happens is that our immune system goes down as well. So the propensity of illnesses such as cancer and so on, even that increases. And remember, when we spoke about the short period of isolation, even 10 days already becomes a significant amount. So how dangerous is loneliness to our physical health? It's the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And we know that cigarettes are now very well proven to be extremely unhealthy to our physical health. 15 cigarettes a day is 2/3 of a pack. It's a lot, right? And so, or some packages are probably just 15, so it's a package a day. And in addition, if you compare lonely people versus people who are not lonely, but these two groups in all other aspects are exactly the same gender distribution, the same age distribution, the same level of education and so on, as similar to each other as a group, the lonely group is more than 26 to 50% likely to die in any given year. Those are serious numbers, and not simply from suicide, not from suicide as a single factor, but from the medical consequences as we have spoken about. So very powerful thing. And now in this year particularly, but generally speaking, at this time of the year, loss enters to the picture. At the beginning of the COVID pandemic, my wife and I kind of looked at each other and say, we hear about all these people that are sick, but we don't even know somebody who's sick. Now, fast forward 10 months later, not do we only know of many people who are ill, we also have family members that passed away from COVID. It's become a real thing. But before we get to the actual loss of other people, think about what the loss is in terms of our power. We are helpless to do anything about that. A vaccine or vaccines are now coming into the world, which is the first real moment of there's something to be done. But none of us had any power over this tiny little viral particle that's invisible, and that makes about 1% of us die when we get it. We had this illusion at the end of 2019 and the beginning of 2020 that we are these well-educated, well-resourced people living in a first world country with small problems, but we are powerful. There's a lot of things we can do. All of a sudden, we're not invulnerable anymore. And if we've not had to deal with that sense of vulnerability before in our lives, then that is a massive problem to suddenly have to cope with. We don't have choices. I have to wear a mask when I'm in a public place. All of those things are real losses to ourselves, loss to our sense of control. So the appearance of anxiety disorders and acute stress disorders and post-traumatic stress disorders becomes completely sensible, because central to those disorders are the philosophy that the sufferer thereof thinks that they don't have choice and control. And as therapists and caregivers, we would always work our behinds off to ensure people that they have more than they think choice and control. This year, not so much, which also, I'll come to that in a few slides down the line, which also really bodes not so great for us, for our health, and for what we're doing about this. But let's come to the most concrete part of loss. This year, losing people isn't only the horrible grief of losing a loved one. It is complicated by the fact that we may have accidentally spread this disease to them. We don't necessarily have proof of that, but there are people probably in this room that has that anguish. I had a mild form of it, but then my grandma got it because I hugged her. And have I now caused the death of my beloved grandma? When people are very sick with the overwhelmed hospitals and intensive care units and frail care centers the way that they are they having rules where we may not allow to be with them at the time of their death? Which in terms of the grieving process would give us some succor and some consolation, not destined to be in many cases this year. And we are not even in most jurisdictions able to honor them with a funeral. There are some places where funerals are not allowed and the people have no choice but to use other means of disposing of the remains of their loved ones. Massive loss, specifically also this time of the year. And so if you think, and all of us think about what's lying ahead, do we know that anything will ever get back to normal again? We don't know. I had a friend, he's a window cleaner in a very large hotel, and he's just a delight to see. He takes his job so seriously, and he is such a inspiration to watch. I think there should be a mini movie made about him. And I spoke to him the other day, and he says he is so annoyed because everybody, all the staff in his hotel now does not touch the handles, but touch all the other surfaces for fear of it being at least more sterile than the handles. And he says, I'm cleaning the handles all the time. They're the safest. And now I have to clean everything. And then Bob, my friend, said, he's not sure that people will, once this pandemic is over, go back opening doors by their handles, but may still push their hands on the glass. So he has a world of extra pain of window cleaning, perhaps in his future, anguish for an uncertain future. If we think about loss, if we think about this loss of control, if we think about how we are told to do things that to some of us doesn't quite even make sense, you can see the anger, which is part of a normal grieving process. You could just look into the world and see the anger very outright manifested, sometimes ready to spill out into verbal and physical violence. And we can see it in ourselves if we examine ourselves, that if we are more irritable than usual, well, that irritability, aside from being caused physically by the sense of loneliness or isolation, also is caused by the sense of loss of control and choice we have. And if we don't understand other people's anger, then we even have more of a sense of loss and control, just snowballing this effect. And it amplifies this loss, the pain of suffering the death of another. It certainly amplifies the incidence of depression. It amplifies alcohol consumption. It amplifies drug consumption, risky behavior, and risk of suicide. So really, at the moment, I'm a miserable messenger, am I not? I'm just telling us about all of the horrors of what we are experiencing. Yes, I am, but I'm also, for any one of you old enough to know the reference, I am also Pollyanna, or if we speak about more recent movie examples, I'm Little Miss Sunshine too, because I'm saying to you that this compassion satisfaction that we all should have, and what is compassion satisfaction? This pleasure one derives from doing our jobs, helping others, which I think all of us as a group does to a larger or a greater, fully professional or part-time sense. That is under such siege, that's decreasing at the moment, leading to caregiver fatigue and leading to outright caregiver burnout, because what we usually do is now not something that we achieve. We can't do our caregiving the way we do because, again, governmental agency tells us to differently, or our demands on us as caregivers has grown so much that it's become impossible to fulfill that role to the satisfaction of the employer. Role confusion, as we have to start giving care not only to our usual circle of care givees or care recipients, but now our family has to do with that as well. We have to give that to them, that role confusion that we can have, and the workload. All of that can be actually beautifully addressed. The good news that the terrible psychological results of giving up, postponing, delegating, and complaining, and I'll tell you now soon where it leads to, can be counteracted. As we are suffering from the trauma of this, we tend to just let go, or we have a job to do, but it's so large that we just say, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll deal with that later, I'm not going to take that phone call now. Or where I really should be doing it myself, I say, why don't you do it? Because I just don't have the strength and the energy and the motivation to do it. And I speak about this world and all the things that are wrong. As this happens, we land up with a total depression. And this is the depression that's not just clinical. This is a depression that is psychological and spiritual. It's a really powerful murderer of ourself. Remember, I said I'm seemingly preaching doom and gloom, but I'm actually saying to you guys that I'm coming now with this mighty enemy that we're dealing with. I'm coming to the place where I'm saying to you, it is totally manageable. I think the first thing that I have to say before I go any further is I want all of you to now for a second think, as a person, how powerful you feel on a scale from 0 to 10. 10 being the most powerful, superpowered hero on the planet of Earth. 0 having nothing, feeling that you're not able to do anything. And I am not going to ask for a poll, but I can tell you that our median number of powerfulness probably today measures quite lower than perhaps at any other time in our career. And I want to just say to you guys, whatever that assessment is, that is a bold-faced lie told you by what's been happening around you. So I want you, as we now enter this stage of what can we do, into a place where you say, hey, Dr. Strauss, you're saying I'm powerful. For the moment, I'll suspend my disbelief and believe that I am way more powerful than I feel. And if we could get to that point, then we can say to ourselves, listen, I am under strain. I am burning. I am fatigued. I'm feeling depressed. I'm feeling anxious. I feel not competent. I feel like everything's overwhelming. But that awareness is my key to saying, I shall not tolerate that. I will refuse to yield to the lies my feelings tell me. We come by those feelings honestly. Please don't hear me that I'm saying we're ridiculous to feel it. But the reality is we are way more powerful than the circumstances of this year of pandemics. We're human beings, and human beings are endless sources of resilience and practicality and inventiveness and innovation and flexibility and compassion and grace and mercy and endless buckets of love. We will not yield to this. So here is what we're going to do. We're first of all going to refuse to yield physically and socially. And so no matter how tired we are, no matter how confined our space, we will every day do more movement than the previous day. Some of my patients are so bereft of motivation and drive and energy that they say, Dr. Strauss, how can you tell me I have to do this? I don't have the energy to do it. I said, okay, when you get up, without even getting up, put your feet on the ground on the side of the bed and lie down over the breadth of the bed, and then get up without using your hands. That's called a stomach crunch. Do it twice. 2 stomach crunches is better than no exercise. And as soon as we do exercise, here is the strangest thing, as soon as we are more mobile, that mobility, that exercise feeds our energy level. Exercise begets energy, and energy begets joy. So no, I'm not prescribing you to do a certain amount. I'm saying to you guys, after today, investigate to yourself how much physical activity you do, and then tomorrow do just 10 minutes more than you're doing today. You don't have to have your fitness, your Fitbit. You don't have to do 10,000 steps. You don't have to do a certain amount of yoga. You don't have to do anything but just do 10 minutes more from tomorrow. Do that for a week and already see how much difference 10 minutes, that extra a day, is going to make within a week. We are powerful beyond our imagination. If you are not physically alone, I'm asking you guys to go to your loved ones after this conversation and say, A professional psychiatrist gave me the following prescription. I am to hug you and hug you hard for 3 minutes. Hug your loved one, telling them what you're doing. Otherwise, they might think, what the heck is going on with you? For 3 minutes. Within that 3 minutes, your loved one will start hugging you back. And something amazing is going to happen. You're going to have a spurt of oxytocin in your brain. Your brain will not be able to resist. And oxytocin is the same hormone that bonds moms and babies during feeding and bonds human beings to each other. Perfectly powerful antidote against loneliness. If you are alone in your place, ask another friend to share a bubble with you and say, I'm supposed to do 3 days of hugging therapy. My mom is the mother, she passed away this year. My mom is the mother of 6 boys. And I always wondered as an adolescent, as I became interested in sex, how the heck did she and my dad ever manage to have 6 boys? Because she was not a touchy-feely person at all. And so in my adulthood, when I see her, she was a short little bird of a thing. I would hug her and she would stiffen up and come on, Peter, let me go. And I'd say, no, Mom, I'm going to hug you till you hug me back. And then she would give me a little tiny sort of a spasmodic hug. And I said, no, that's just a spasm. That's not a hug. And by this time she would then giggle and I would hold her till she would hug me properly back. And for the rest of that day, my mom would be in the best spirits because through her developmental story, she was just not somebody who felt comfortable about hugging, but the adult son said, nonsense, let's get our oxytocin going. And it'll be a very fond memory of my mom that I did touch therapy with her every time that I see her. 3 minutes a day. So far, I've asked you 13 minutes, 10 minutes of exercise, 3 minutes of touch therapy. Spend a minute every day talking to either a loved one or a colleague or anybody that you interact with about how you're feeling. There is a trick to this. Don't say, if you're not feeling good, say, I'm feeling sad or I'm feeling bored. Say that, but don't say why. If you say why, there's a neuronal circuit in our brain that then exacerbates the feeling because the brain reminds itself about why it's feeling like that. But if you only say, I feel sad, or I feel terrified, or I feel lonely, another pathway activates in the brain that soothes our amygdala, which is the source of most of our negative emotions. So by the expression of what you're feeling, you are going to decrease that feeling by just simply saying it. And if you say it to somebody else, they have empathy and they're going to validate you being able to say that. 1 minute, share your feelings every day, at least once a time. And I'm just saying a minute because I don't want to get you to have to do an hour's work every day. We're at 14 minutes. And then socialize even in a distance. The social media is a bit of a dragon with fiery breath. One has to be careful because there's so many things about it that can isolate us. But if you have any kind of a hobby, there are beautiful apps and platforms where you can join other people with like-minded interests and have that virtual togetherness of doing a craft or working on poetry or studying a new language or doing bird identification, whatever it is that is something that is joyful to you. And there are 2 apps, Netflix Party, which helps people to watch movies together simultaneously, no matter how far apart you are. My daughter, who lives in California at the moment with her American husband, survived 2.5 years of distance dating between her and her husband. He was in Chicago. Welcome to the Chicago person that I hear is here, and she was here in Abbotsford, and they did Netflix together. The Party app didn't exist at the time, but they watched movies together and commented real time. And then there's another app called House Party, where if you join that, people can play games together and do virtual games together as if you're actually in the same room. So make use of the social media side to its positive side, not to its negative side. If all of this physical and social activity doesn't make a difference in a week or two, and you feel as if you're going down steadily and soundly, don't hesitate to then seek help. Talk to your nurse practitioner, talk to your family physician, talk to your crisis line, talk to somebody who you know is wise, talk to another caregiver, so that there's somebody that can help you. Lots of help aside from these generalities are very much available out there. And then I want to also say to you the following things. I want you to do 3 more things every day. No matter how overwhelmed and cantankerous and sad and upset you feel, stop right now and think, okay, with all this mess that's going on with me, what is positive in my life? Even if it becomes as basic as I have clothes on, or I'm not cold, or I sit on a really nice chair. Doesn't matter the size of the thing you find positively. But if you think now, quietly by yourself, okay, I'm not doing so well, but what do I have that's positive? Immediately that modifies loneliness, isolation, and loss. And second to that, and family to that, what is there that I can feel grateful about? It cannot be the same thing that you feel positive about. I remember in the early days, my wife taught my kids to pray, and she told them that they should every night say thank you to God for the things in their life that you should be grateful about. And it was so fun. I wish I had those days over. You'd sit there and supervise their prayer, and they would say, "Dear Lord Jesus, thank you for mom, and thank you for dad, and thank you for the two cats." And those were good. But then they would start saying things such as, "Thank you for the doorknob, and thank you for the roof, and thank you for the carpet, and thank you for the window." And you would, as the adults, kind of roll your eyes at each other and try to look at your watch because it was a long session. But in the end, they were right. What would we do if we don't have doorknobs? How would we get through doors? What would we do if we don't have a roof over our heads? What would we do if we don't have windows through which we can see the beauty of nature outside? So I've never forgotten the lesson my daughter's naive, long list of gratefulness told me and taught me. And then the last thing, on a daily basis, despite the fact that we're exhausted as caregivers, find everything one day that's not transactional. So much of what happens today is I do something in order to get something back. And that is doomed to fail, because sooner or later, I'm going to give something to somebody who's not capable of giving me back for some reason or another. Then that's going to disappoint me, and it's going to be a further loss. So every day, also find something to give to somebody else that is not having any tags attached to it. That is something you give for the fun and the joy of giving. It doesn't have to cost money at all. I asked this of a patient of mine just before this conference started, this workshop started, and she had been very down the past week, compromising her attendance at her hair design school because she's not attended 2 of the past week's days. And I said, "What is there that you can give?" And she said, "I can give my kindness." And she's a very kind person. And I said, "And so, yes, give that kindness specifically to one person. Pick up the phone now and give kindness. Say to this person, I want to give you my kindness today." And these things may sound simple and perhaps naive and childlike. I'm telling you, if you follow through on these things, the previous page, wanted to show that to you again, exercise, touch therapy, sharing your feelings, socialization despite social isolation, and if necessary, seeking help, plus these three things, in a week's time, you're going to be just awed at the power that you didn't even know had been submerged in you all along. I wish all of us a very, very festive season. And I'm not a good joke teller. And I can't for the life of me remember to tell a joke anyway that I've heard, though I enjoy jokes. But I came up with one that I thought that was really funny. And people are polite enough to laugh when I make the joke. When I see my patients now, knowing that I'll see them in the new year next, I say to them, I hope the next year is a better year than this one. Not that that's a high bar. And people dutifully chuckle. So also my wish for you to have a festive season of regeneration and reinvigoration and recharge and renewal. And for sure, people, the next year cannot be as bad as this one. Let's go from strength to strength with that. Thank you very much for all of your attention. And I'd be very happy to take questions now.